if you got my email about our fair, this is a room dedicated to the valorization of Afro-Brazilian culture. As you probably know, we have a very strong Afro influence in our culture, African culture influence in our culture. So our students decorated this room, and they are presenting like big names, important names in the anti-racist fight in Brazil and in the world to visitors who come and visit our fair. So we have like it's decorated where everything here was made by them. Mm. There's also a picture of you there. I'm gonna try to show it to you later. Let's see if we can do that because of the computer. But everything was decorated by them. They studied a lot for the subject, but we think we still have a lot to learn from you. So I'm just gonna leave you to it, okay? Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And the room looks beautiful. It's a real pleasure to talk with y'all. And honestly, I want y'all to treat this like your time. So, you know, I don't get to talk with students overseas a lot and talk with different experiences. And so I love to be able to learn from young people around the world as well. So I guess I'll start a little bit with like how I started writing and why I do the work I do. But I would really love it if you guys had any questions at all, if you think about them, to ask me, because honestly, that's probably the best use of the time. Y'all can Google me and find out whatever you want about me. This is really, you know, a great chance for you guys to be able to ask whatever questions you might have. But I loved writing as a kid. Like even before I could read, I was making up stories. It was the thing I always wanted to do. But I was also I had a very poor family. And so by the time I hit middle school here, which is like when I was 13, 14 years old, I did not think I was going to be a writer because I needed to find a job that would support my family and pay bills. And so I just wrote as a hobby, but I went to school and studied politics, and then I started working in tech, and I was a young mother. And I started writing about race when Trayvon Martin was killed. And are you all familiar with Trayvon Martin and the killing of Trayvon Martin?
No, not really.
Okay. So this Trayvon Martin, this would have been 2013, was a 17-year-old kid who was walking around on the streets in Florida wearing a little hooded jacket. He went to a corner store to buy some candy, and a white man became convinced that he didn't belong in this neighborhood, and called the police, and then chased this kid down, fought him, and killed him. And the police decided that the man who killed him, the adult who had killed this child, would not go to jail, because they decided that the white man had a right to be afraid of this child and kill him, even though the kid was just walking down the street. When that happened, it was the birth of a lot of protest for a lot of Black people around the country. And as a mother as well, you know, I felt it really deeply. And that's when I started writing more about race and racism, because a lot of people where I live, in the part of the country where I live, didn't want to talk about the racism where we were. And that was kind of the beginning of my writing journey. And I really started writing from this personal place of pain and heartache and trying to get people to understand why we needed to address these issues. And I did not intend to be a writer at the time. I was really just trying to find a way to process everything that was happening. But the work really resonated with a lot of people, and a lot of people started sharing it and talking about it. and asking me to write more. And before I knew it, I was writing a lot, and I quit my job and decided to write full time. By 2016, an agent approached me about writing a book, and that book is So You Want to Talk About Race. And I worked on that for a few years, and that came out in 2018. And I have been a full-time writer now for about a decade. And it's my full-time job outside of the movement work, the community activism work that I also do here in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. So I was wondering, any of y'all have any questions or anything for me?
Well, no, he's a little nervous. He wants to listen to you a little bit more, and then he will be brave enough to ask you a question. That's what he's saying.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you fully.
Yeah, I think I have to come here by the phone, by the microphone. He said he's a little shy.
Uh-huh.
Ask in a while. He needs a little more time because he's very nervous.
That's fine. All right. I will keep talking, and then when one of y'all gets brave enough to ask me a question, I'm here. I'll say, for being a young person, it's really important that you know that your story matters, that what's happening that you see in the world matters. I find that a lot of people don't want to hear from young people and think that young people haven't lived enough life to be able to share their stories. And that's not true. Whenever I interview activists and movement workers, so many of them got their start at your age or even younger. And so much of their work is shaped by this age and this time. So what happens in your school matters, what happens in your towns matter, what happens in your family matters. All of that is super important. And it's really important that you know that your story and your opinion absolutely matters. And sharing that is really important. The world needs to hear from younger people. So much of our world is run by older people, making decisions that people your age have to live with. And it shouldn't be that way. You all should have an equal say, or even the majority say, in what happens in your life and what happens in the world around you. And so I encourage you all, if you read stories like mine or anyone else's and you are inspired, to write your story down and to share your opinion. It doesn't matter if you're not 100% right all of the time, because no one is. What matters is that you are sharing and talking and contributing to discussion, and you're willing to learn from others and allow others to learn from you. Does anyone in this classroom like to read or write?
Does anybody like to read? Raise your hands, the ones who like to read or write. Right? Yeah.
All right. How many of you like fiction more than nonfiction?
Fiction more than nonfiction. Fiction. Fiction. Most of them.
And that's fine. I think it's so important. A lot of times when we talk about writing, some of the most important, like I have tattoos all over my arms of my favorite writers. And almost all of them are fiction writers, even though I write nonfiction, because I think imagination is very important for liberation. We live in a world where so much has been determined for us, and imagination of what the world could be is actually really important, even for activists, for people who want to write nonfiction even. It's important to think what could be different than this. And so there's a lot of really revolutionary nonfiction in the world as well that I highly recommend, especially if you are thinking about the African diaspora, if you're thinking about Afro-Brazilians. We have all African peoples have a rich history of fiction that has allowed us to envision a world beyond oppression and harm, and a world beyond what has been laid before us. And it's super important to our history and our culture. And so I love that. I love that so many of you love fiction books.
Ijeoma, I think as a teacher, this is Priscilla again. As a teacher, Joy and I, when we're talking about what we would do for the fair, right? We always contribute with video conference or meaningful talk. And then I read your book, and I thought that the way you expressed your ideas and the way you communicated with everybody was very important. That's why we chose your book for them to read, because we thought it was very, in a certain way, very didactic. Does this word make sense for you? Like very easy to understand and to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
But still, when we were thinking and discussing and talking to the students, it's still about how are we gonna present what we learned. I mean, I don't know, in my email I told you, like, we're all, or most of all, are white people. At least for Brazil, we're considered white people.
Mm-hmm.
Are in a privileged school. And we get visitors from unprivileged schools that have a different reality. I tell them all the time, right, kids, we live in a bubble, you know? We have to pop this bubble. I think for me, the most important thing right now as a person, as an educator, and I think it would be interesting for our students to learn too, is I know you talked about it in your book, but I'd like to hear more about what can we do? Because Joy and I got to the point where we're gonna make an exposition of valorization of Afro-Brazilian culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there are more actions and more things we can do to make sure we have a more equal society, or at least to fight for it. We know it's not something that is going to happen in a month, in a year, or in 10 years, but to fight for it, you know? What is our place in this?
I think it's important, first of all, to spend some time listening to those most impacted by the racism and segregation where you live, right? So Brazil is a place that's known for being incredibly segregated, right? So a lot of separations between the Afro-Brazilians and white presenting Brazilians, right? So it means that you don't just have social segregation, also economic segregation, political segregation, and with that is a disparity and unfairness, right? So knowing that, it's really important to understand that within any population that is being harmed or marginalized, and this includes Afro-Brazilians, have their own activists and movement leaders who are trying to change that and fight that. And some of them are your age, some of them are older, but they are speaking as loudly as possible about what is happening where they live. And it is important for you to seek that out, to try to learn directly from the people most hurt. And then you look at what power you have where you live. High school students have a lot of power. Even though society will try to say that you don't, you actually do. You are a generation that is very close, moving into a lot of political power, right? You will be able to vote soon. You will be holding jobs soon. You will be moving on to college or university. Like, you will have a lot of power. And right now, you are setting a social standard where you live. So if every day you and your friends go about your day and you never think about anyone outside of your classroom or your bubble, you are creating an expectation that will impact how you vote, how you work, and it will have a bad impact on the lives of Afro-Brazilians. But you can have the opposite impact, where you decide, I'm going to learn what's happening and I'm going to see what I can do about it. I'm going to make sure my friends understand what's happening. I'm going to make sure my parents and my family understand. I'm going to vote in a particular way. I'm going to spend my money in businesses owned by Afro-Brazilians and people who are often don't get nearly as much money coming into their businesses or their streets or their shops, right? You get to make a choice on how you act in this system and what you think is normal. And the more you do that and the more loudly you do it, the more your peers will do the same. But you only do that if first you start listening to the people where you live as they talk about what they need and what they're experiencing, and you decide to act. So young people have a lot of power. And I know this because even here in the United States, they're trying to make it illegal to talk in schools about racism. And the reason why they're trying to make it illegal is because they know that young people, when they learn about this, they want to do something about it. And they don't want to change the way things are. And so that's how scared they are of young people, that they're actually trying to make it illegal for them to learn. And so I want you to think about that and think about, if they're that scared, that means that you have that much power. And that's something you can always act with.
Any more questions, guys? Israel, I know you have one. Yes, you have to get here because the microphone.
Hi, Ijeoma.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to put this chair here for whoever asks you questions. Okay.
My name is Israel, and I read your book. I learned so much reading, and I want to make a question for you. Okay. I know that you wrote So Talk About Race in 2016. Okay, and if you could keep your reading,
Writing.
If you could keep writing this book nowadays, what would you add to this book today?
That's a great question. One thing I would say is, in this book, I talked about police reform. I don't believe in reform anymore. And I don't think I believed it then. I just didn't have the words for it. I don't believe in policing at all. And if I were to write it today, I would say that we need to get rid of the American system of policing. The American system of policing, as I wrote, started with slave catching, with capturing escaped enslaved people and returning them to slavery. A system like that can't be fixed. So if I were to rewrite it, I would say, let's get rid of the entire system that believes that people should be locked away forever or shouldn't be a part of society. And let's replace it with a system that wants to care for society, that wants to address the root causes of harm, and wants to return power to communities to decide how to fix our problems.
Okay. And what's the hardest chapter of the book, So Talk About Race, for you to discuss publicity?
That's a great question. The education chapter. When I wrote about my brother's experience in school and how they were bullied by teachers, I didn't know how hard that was until I did an early reading of my book when it first came out. And I started to read that chapter and I started crying and my throat closed up. And I realized it was just too emotional for me to talk about publicly. And so I never tried to like read it in public again. I think that one was very hard because I love my brother very much. And reading that, especially to an audience of people, was just too difficult.
We want to know you more. What's the favorite author that influenced you to write this book? What's the most important influence in your life?
Oh.
Music and books and anything.
So I have 4 of them. Some of them here. So I have tattoo portraits all over my arms of all of my favorite authors. So there's 4. This one here is Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut was an amazing fiction writer. And then Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison was an amazing Black fiction writer, and her books have meant a lot to me. And then Lorraine Hansberry, she was a playwright, a Black playwright, and wrote amazing plays about the Black experience in America. And then Chinua Achebe, and he was a Nigerian author who wrote a lot about Nigeria, because I am Nigerian American. So my father's family is Nigerian. And he wrote a lot about the violent colonization of Africa and the impact that it had on Nigeria. And so those writers helped me a lot. Kurt Vonnegut helped me understand that you could be very sad about the state of the world, but still love it. That you could still love people even while they disappoint you or hurt you. Toni Morrison helped me understand that I can write just for Black people and for the community I love, that I don't have to translate my world experience for other people. And Lorraine Hansberry was one of the first queer Black women I was able to read and read her life experience, and that meant a lot to me. And Chinua Achebe has been able to talk in heartbreaking detail about the harm that colonialism does to people around the world, and it has greatly influenced my work.
Yes. Ijeoma, did you imagine that the book would have all that impact on the public? Because we in Brazil and we read your book. Did you imagine that?
No, not at all, because I had never written a book before. And so I was just excited that I had a book, that it existed. And so now, the book came out in 2018. So it's been 8 years, and seeing it move all over to Brazil, to Korea, and Germany, all these different languages, all these different spaces, and hearing from people all over the world has meant so much to me. I never imagined in a million years that the book would be as impactful as it has been.
And I felt so much progress in my life after I read your book, because I understood more about race, about races, about intersectionality that you told in your book. But did you see any progress in society after wrote your book in the United States?
A couple of things I have noticed. One, I think all of us who write about racism, we're all trying to help some people, right? We're all trying to help people understand and to make change. So over the years, I have been fortunate enough to hear from people who send me letters and emails talking about how they used my book in their workplace or in their school to make differences in their policies, in what they do. And that matters a lot to me. I think that every day there are new people coming to understand what is happening in the world. And when there are so many books that will help them along the way, there's so many books that helped me along the way, helped me understand the world as well. And then I will also say, in an industry standpoint, to be a professional writer, the writing industry in the United States is exceptionally white. Most of the editors are white. Most of the publishers who decide what books get published are white. So another change that my book made with its success was it actually made it a lot easier for other Black writers in the United States to have their books published, because the publishers could see that people wanted to read more stories like this. So a lot more writers were able to get their careers off the ground and to get their books professionally published after my book came out. And I'm incredibly happy about that.
Okay, that was my questions. I will
Let somebody else.
let somebody else. You. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great questions.
Anybody else? Come here, Rafa. Next. Rafael and then Paulo. Sit there in the question chair.
Hi.
Hi.
Speak up, okay, Rafa?
Okay. If you read the book and don't have read the book, you have read the book with our age.
You had reading the book when you were our age.
Yes.
What about it?
Okay. If you
Oh, if she had read a book like hers
eh,
when she was your age, all
Yes.
right.
So when I was your age, some of the books I read when I was your age, the autobiography of Malcolm X was a book I read. The Things They Carried was a book about the Vietnam War that I read. A lot of Chinua Achebe's books, Things Fall Apart, which is a book about the colonization of Africa. And then I read a lot. I started reading about intersectionality when I first started college. And so that was really important to me. So Kimberly Crenshaw's books. But I also learned a lot, from fiction as well. And reading a lot of political fiction was important to me. I loved learning about the world and learning about why things were the way they were. So I think I would have liked a book like mine when I was your age. And I always try to write books that are accessible to people so that if you are maybe 12, 13 and older, you can read it and understand what's in it. But yeah, books shaped. I would not be a writer if I hadn't been a reader first.
that's up.
Thank you. Who's next? Kawa.
So, good afternoon. My name is Gawan,
Hello.
and I would like to ask, how do you view the impact of George Floyd's brutal murder on not only Black people, but minorities as a whole?
The impact of his murder? I will say that the impact has varied, right? When I am old enough now to have had to witness the brutal murder of many Black people over my lifetime, right? Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, so many other people killed. And for my life, it always has an impact. And for my community, a lot of our movements are built around this. When it was 2020 and George Floyd was murdered at the same time as Breonna Taylor as well. And in the United States, I don't know if you all learned about Breonna Taylor, but within just a few months of George Floyd being killed, Breonna Taylor was also killed in her home while she was sleeping by police. Those murders shook us. And when we lived in Seattle, there were very large protests. And the Seattle protesters took over entire city blocks for weeks. And there were some important things we were able to do. So I have been part of a protest for a decade to try to close our youth jails, jails that existed only to incarcerate children. And most of the children in those youth jails were Black children because of the racism in this country. So I have been protesting with many other people to close the youth jail where we live for 10 years. We were able to, when George Floyd was killed, we were able to finally get a commitment to close that jail after 10 years of work. So some things like that mattered. But I will also say that because we fought so hard, because we got so much small change around the country, there has been a very violent backlash to that. So many white people, many racist people in the country, many powerful people in the country became very afraid of us after that and have tried to pass laws to make it so that we could never have protests that big again, to make it so that we can never make that much change again. So it's a battle that we're always in. But in long term, for me, the impact of the murder of George Floyd is very similar to the impact of the murder of Michael Brown or Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, all of these people that in America we have had to watch be murdered by police in our lifetime.
Thank you for your time. That's it.
I think we have one more question. Hang on. Oh, João has a question for you. John? It's not John, it's actually João. João.
Hi,
Yeah, João.
my name is João Pedro, and I have a question for you because we learned about the great navigations during our history classes. So we also learned about the Jesuit missions. And I want to know about your opinion about the religions, how the religions reinforce the segregation throughout the history.
Oh, how did religion reinforce segregation, like in America, in the US?
Like when colonize other countries.
So I will say that Christianity in the United States and white supremacy are very linked. And I'll be very nerdy about this, okay? Because I have written about this in a lot of different books. There used to be no idea of whiteness. Whiteness used to not exist, right? Used to be you were English or French or Irish or Dutch. But when the United States was seeking, when the colonizers of the United States, the violent white people of the United States, were seeking to take over this country that was occupied by Native people, right? There were hundreds of millions of people here, right? That were killed by the United States, by the colonizers of the United States. Well, there was, I think, about 30 million people here, and they were killed and wiped out. 98% of the people were killed. And in order to justify that, there had to be an idea that they were supposed to do that. And in order to justify enslaving people, right, which is so brutal and inhumane, you had to have a reason. And so I came up with this idea that God wanted them to. So this is not religious as in God never said that, right? We know that's true. God never said these things. But people will do whatever they can to have an excuse for doing horrible things. So there was this idea that God wanted the Christians, which then meant white people, to spread across the continent, across the United States, to kill or kidnap or imprison all of the native peoples, all the indigenous people that were there, and to steal people from Africa and force them to become Christian and make them work the land. So I do not necessarily blame religion because people made the decision to make that a part of their religion. I am not religious, I am an atheist, but I know that religion means a lot of things for a lot of people. So religion has been used to keep this system going. And we see this even today. In the United States today, there is an effort to kind of start this all over again. So there are cities close to where I live where you aren't allowed to live there if you aren't Christian. And you aren't allowed to live there if you don't uphold their Christian values, which usually are like white values. And this is all an effort to maintain control and power. And so I think it's very important that we always are aware of any efforts people make to force people into any belief that harms others or makes you feel better than other people. That is always a problem, but it doesn't even have to be religion. In some countries, they will use language, right? And they will say, if you don't speak our language, you aren't as good as us. In some countries, they will say, if you don't learn our customs, you aren't allowed, to have children here, or you're not allowed to live here. All of these things are very similar to religion, and they're all used to maintain control and power over other people. And so we always have to be aware of that and recognize that when that happens, it is people making a decision to manipulate others, and they will use whatever they can to do that. And a lot of times, because religion is the oldest system we have as human beings, it was our political system before we had politicians, that is often what people use, but it can be anything that people will use.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, from here. It's coming from across the room.
Wait a minute. I'm getting closer. Nice to meet you. My name is Guilherme. Excuse me, I gotta read the questions I wrote here. Sometimes people hide themselves from the truth because they guess it's easier to live with it, okay? It's happier. And some people even say that ignorance is a blessing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to deal with this hard truth daily. How can you find hope and happiness in a hopeless world that you see every day?
For me, it's really important to remember that I exist, right? The United States, the system of the United States does not want Black people to live, and has for 400 years tried to hurt Black people, to put us in prisons, to enslave us, kill us. But I exist. I am here, right? I am here because my ancestors loved me and loved themselves and took care of each other and loved each other. They are some of the bravest people in the world, right? Knowing that Black people in America are some of the strongest, bravest people in the world because we are still here after 400 years of the government trying to hurt us. And Black people around the world are some of the strongest people in the world because everywhere in the world has tried to hurt Black people. They've tried to steal from Africa. Countries all around the world have tried to enslave us and harm us and keep us poor. And we are still here, and we still make the best music. We still make some of the best food. We still take care of each other. We still write books and poems and sing songs. How could I not be hopeful? I have to be hopeful because otherwise that's an insult to all of the work that Black people around the world have done. I am a part of that. I'm so proud to be a part of that. And so nothing can defeat me. Even if tomorrow soldiers were to come in here and take me away, I would still win. Why? Because I wrote my books. because I made the world better for other people, because I am part of this tradition of Blackness in the world that is so beautiful. And so it's always important to remember what you come from. It's always important to remember that and be proud of that and honor that every day. And if you do that, there is no system, there is no government, there is nothing that can take that away from you.
That's actually a great answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one question that I talked about with Priscilla while reading your book, but I wanted to hear from you. Like you told, it was pretty hard to talk about race with your mom. And it seems like you were dying almost, you know?
Yes.
But why was it that hard? Wasn't she supposed to be your, I don't know, your safe, how can I say?
Safe place?
Safe place, yeah, safe spot. And she was ready to listen, I guess, for what you are reading in the book. So why was it that hard?
I think this is hard for most kids who are Black in the world but have a white parent, because everything, if you think about television and movies where you see Black Americans in it, right? So often they are portrayed as violent or all of these bad things, right? All of that, even if you love Black people in your life, it influences how you see the world. And so even if you are a white parent of a Black child and you love your child, my mom loves me so much, I know that, right? Even if you love your child and you still have these things that stop you from fully seeing. My mom will never be Black a day in her life, right? So she will never fully understand. Just like, you know how sometimes when you're trying to explain to your parents what you're going through, and they're like, I know, I've been there, but they haven't, right? Even if they were kids once, they're not kids now. They don't know fully. Well, it's even more if you're Black. My mom will never have been Black in her life. She will never experience racism towards her. She will never be afraid. My mom is not afraid of cops. You know, she could walk up and tell them to go away. If she gets pulled over, she can yell at them. She knows they're not going to hurt her. But anytime I get pulled over by cops, I think I could die, because people die. Black people die just from traffic stops. So that's a difference in our life. And so these conversations become hard because sometimes parents are very afraid that if their children start talking about what's different, that it means that they're not connected anymore. And so for my mom, a lot of the conversation was difficult. One, because she was afraid that if we talked about how different we were, that it meant we were so separate and we were never going to be close. But also because it is hard, it feels unsafe sometimes to remember that your mom does not understand fully. And so even though I write for a living, I talk about these things, sometimes when my mom would say things that show such a lack of understanding, it makes you feel sad or scared because your parent is supposed to be safe. But my mom forgets all of the time that, like, I don't want to be around police officers, you know? So if I'm driving her car and something is wrong with her car that could get us pulled over, she'll forget to tell me. And then I am at risk, right? Because she would never think she's at risk. And so those sorts of things make conversations hard. I am lucky because my mom wants to have this conversation more than many white parents do in the United States. So when I talk to other people like me who are Black people with a white parent, a lot of them say that their moms their parents refuse to hear about what racism is like, or about how they can have a better relationship and be able to talk about these things. And that hurts them a lot because it's part of who I am, right? And so it gets uncomfortable. It gets uncomfortable to have to explain to your parents over and over again these things that are very basic to your life. But because I love my mom, I still have these conversations with her, even if they are uncomfortable for both of us. And to her credit, she is always willing to have them with me as well. And so we've become a lot closer over the years because we've had these conversations, even though they are uncomfortable. But some people never want to have those conversations. And I don't want to have them because they're not fun for me. But I am willing to have them because I want to be close to my mom.
Do you think it's important to have these kind of conversations with everyone around you?
No, I don't. And the reason why I say this, and I'm saying this only, I think, to Black people or racialized people, right? People who are made to feel less than because of their race. You should have these conversations if you are Black with the people you care about that you think want to be better or want to make change. Do not have them with people who just want to debate you and prove you wrong. Do not have them with people who are never going to listen to you, because that takes up your energy. It hurts your heart. It will break you down so that you don't have enough energy to get through your day. And it is important that you care for yourself. Now, white people, I think you should be having this conversation as much as you can with other white people all of the time, because you don't have to think about this all day, right? If you walk into a room and you don't have to look around and say, how many people like me are in this room? Am I safe? Who's scared of me? Who's looking at me like I might have stolen something, right? You don't have to do that. You can just be in a room. You don't have to think about when it comes time to vote. Does this person think I'm a human being, right? If you encounter a police officer, you don't have to think, am I gonna die right now? All of these things that we have to think of every day, you don't have to think of. And so you have the energy where you should be talking with other white people about this and talking so that you don't have to, because it is not fair. It is not fair that Black and brown people have to think all of the time about their own safety in the world. And white people never do, especially when it is white people making Black and brown people unsafe. And so the more that you can talk about it, and the more you talk about it with your friends and family, even if they don't want you to, that better it makes it for us.
Yeah, sometimes I'm afraid about talking about it because I don't know if I should, because it's not my place. It's not what I live. So I don't know if I'm talking right or if I'm saying bullshit.
And you won't always be talking right. That's important to know. Everyone makes mistakes, right? So it's always important to know that when you're talking, that someone might say, that's not right. And then you say, oh, sorry, let me go learn more, right? And that's so important to do, but it's worth it to keep trying. And so that's where you stop and you go, oh, I messed that up. Let me learn. And I even, from my book, there's a chapter in my book on the model minority myth, right? That book is about the Asian American experience. I am not Asian, right? It was very important for me to include that in my book, because if I'm talking about racism, I can't leave groups out. I can't say this is all that there is racism. But since I'm not Asian, I had to be very responsible. And that meant I took that chapter to Asian writers and activists and said, can you read this for me? Can you please tell me what I've messed up? Can you tell me what's wrong? And they were generous enough to do that for me. And it helped me learn and helped me write better, right? But I hear from people all of the time who send me letters saying, thank you for including this, because I never pick up books about racism and see anything about Asian people in it. And it means so much to me. But I had to take a risk and I was scared. I was scared to do it because I was like, if I mess this up, people are going to yell at me and say, you shouldn't have written about it anyways. And so I was careful. And when my friends told me, oh, you got this part wrong, or you should include this instead, I was thankful. Thank you for telling me, this helps. And it made it a much better chapter. But it was very important that I talk about it. And so it is important that you talk about it, but still be willing to keep learning, and just when you mess up, say, I am so sorry. I will do better next time. And that's it. You know, it doesn't have to be a huge deal. You just say, I'm sorry, I'll do better next time. And most people don't even want to say sorry. Most of the time when people mess up and you say, hey, you got that wrong, someone will be like, how dare you say that to me? And that's not the right response. You just say, thank you for telling me, I'm so sorry. And then you do better. And then it's over. You don't have to deal with it anymore.
Fair enough. And the next one, you said about the police to Israel that you wish it ends, you know, that you don't believe in reformation. Reformation, is that the word? Anymore. And I don't believe about reformation because even in Brazil, police is pretty racist, homophobic, sexist, and other things you can imagine. Like there was an operation of the special forces these days that killed a lot of people. I don't know if you have seen
I
it.
did. I saw that. It was horrific.
Yeah, it was butchery. It was horrible. But what do you think? Yeah, what do you think we should do instead of the police? How would it deal with criminality in a society?
That's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked that. So it's important to understand why crime exists, right? So first, let's just say crime is a legal term that is not a moral term. So politicians, governments decide what is crime and what is not crime. So there are rich people who are stealing from us every day, right? Business owners who are killing their workers every day. And it's not crime because they've decided that's not illegal. But there are people who steal food because they need to feed their families, and that is considered crime, right? So know that, right? Like when we talk about crime and criminality, we're talking about things that power systems have named. So what I'm going to talk about instead is harm, right? What we do that harms other people instead of crime. So if we are talking about addressing harm, which is why we often think we need police, we're talking about assaulting someone, killing someone, stealing from someone. We're talking about harm. Harm always has a reason. Human beings are very social creatures. We know we cannot survive alone, right? Part of how we became humans is our brains are big enough to allow us to communicate with each other, protect each other, care for each other. So that's human nature. So anytime we do something that violates that, like hurt our neighbor, right? Take from our neighbor, we know something has gone wrong, right? Because it's not natural for us. So when we talk about addressing harm, we have to say what went wrong. Very few people steal from each other because it's fun. They steal from people because they need something. They are lacking something in society. So we live in a society where people are being arrested for stealing food from grocery stores. But why are people stealing food? Because they're hungry, right? So if we wanted to stop people from stealing, we would make sure everyone was fed. We would make sure everyone had a place to live, right? We would make sure that people who wanted jobs could find jobs. We would care for people. We would have medical care so people could afford to go to the doctor. So in the United States, especially, right? If I had an emergency, I had a cyst in my ovary, it cost $20,000 to fix. Last year, I had to fix my teeth. That cost $50,000. So you can imagine why people would steal, right? Why people would do all of these things to survive. Violence, when we think about violence, when violence happens in our community. So as a Black person, right, Black people, we try not to call the police ever, right? Most of my friends will never call the police. But if someone hurts someone, then we say, what happened? We gather around that person. We say, why did you do this? What made you think this was okay? What's happening? Are you drinking too much? Did you learn these harmful things about other people, about women that made you think you could hit women? How do we fix this? What do you owe the person you hurt? What do we need to do? Who influenced you? What do they owe, right? Like we try to address it as a society. So it's a process. If we were to look practically at how we get rid of police, it is a step-by-step process. So one is you start taking away anything that's not an emergency, right? So police should never be showing up because someone is having a mental health crisis, right? If you see someone shouting on the street at nobody, you don't need the police for that. You need someone with mental health training to come and talk to them and make sure they're okay, to make sure they're safe. If you have a fight in your neighborhood, you don't need the police for that. What you need are a bunch of parents to show up and say, what are you doing? Why are you fighting? You know, like you need that. And so what you start to do first is you take away these things from the police, and then you say, we don't need that. And so when you have things like police coming in and clearing out neighborhoods, like we saw in Brazil, in this horrific violence, we need to look at the whole structure, right? So, because this is all happening in advance of the game, right? All of the games coming through, we see this violence every time. To say, one, who's making money off of this? Who wants these people cleared? Why are we pretending like there aren't high, powerful people involved in this drugs trade? Why are only dark-skinned and Black people being targeted here? And start addressing it and saying, no, we don't need this. If you wanted to make these neighborhoods safer, you would be putting jobs in these neighborhoods. You would be putting food sources in these neighborhoods. You would be putting better schools in these neighborhoods. All of those things, that's what you invest in instead. But instead, like all of these countries with these really violent police forces put a huge portion of all of the tax dollars and government money into policing. And it takes that money out of neighborhoods that need it the most. And then we say, why do people create harm? I think we also need a thorough accounting of what harm actually is, because we also know that like these actions that we saw in Brazil were everyday people being killed and hurt, right? They were really looking for any young Black men and harming them. And so we need to be very clear about what was happening and who's responsible, and to make sure it never happens again. But that means that everyone has to care. And that means that even if you don't live in that neighborhood, you have to understand that that makes everyone unsafe. So even though in the United States, most white people think they don't have to be afraid of the cops, that's not true. They just don't have to be afraid of the cops right now. But the police, their function in the state, and the same with the police in Brazil, is to make sure that whatever the state wants, it can get through violence. And so if you decide to protest because you want better working conditions, the police will show up and be just as violent with you. And so whenever we see that violence, it's important to know that they can and will turn that against anybody. Just because right now they're using it primarily against Black and brown people doesn't mean that no one is safe as long as these systems exist the way they are. But it is a process. And so what I would say, if you want to learn how to live without police, look at the neighborhoods that never call the police and see how they handled it. Because every neighborhood has harm in it. And if you're not calling the police, we are figuring out on our own how to deal with this, you know? And that's what we do in my neighborhood. When we hear that someone has stolen from someone or hurt or abused someone, we address it without the police. And we have to, because we care about our communities. And so investing in that, learning from that is really important.
All right. I guess that's that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Anybody else have questions? Maria Luisa, first girl brave enough to come here.
Nice. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Isa, and I want to ask you a question that what do you think is the easiest way to start teaching about race to kids? Because I have a little cousin, and I think he really does live in a bubble, and I wanted to be part of this change in his life because I know it's important. And after reading your book, I learned a lot of things, and I want to do this with him because I care about him and I care about his future too.
Mm-hmm. So I think that it is so important that young kids learn about this. And the reason why it is important is because young Black kids and young kids of color have to learn about it, right? So like in the United States, we have a preschool program. I don't know if you have that in Brazil, but it is a program of school from the age of like 3 to 5. And it's mostly like daycare, but it's school too. You learn your ABCs, you know, and how to count. Black children at 3 to 5 are 4 times more likely to be kicked out of those schools. So we already have to teach our children at age 3 what racism is, because it's happening. So if young Black kids, and if your Afro-Brazilian peers are having to learn at 3, 4, 5, white kids should learn too, because these are their friends, these are their peers, these are people growing up at the same age. So I always like to tell a little bit about history, and part of what you can talk about are the Afro-Brazilians who have survived racism, who have built great things. And then you can talk about how they can help other kids their age fight racism. So for my son, even though of course my youngest son is Black, when I would talk to him about racism when he was little, we would talk about history and what has happened. And then we would talk about what we're doing to change it so that he doesn't feel scared. And then we would talk about what he could do in his class. So I would say, okay, you have kids who might not understand this. How could you talk about this to your friends? If you hear someone say a bad thing about an Asian kid in your class, what are you going to say? Right? And so we would talk about this so that they knew that they could step in and say stuff, and they could protect their classmates, and they could help their classmates learn. And so they didn't just learn a bad thing about the world. They also learned the great things that people are doing to fight it and what they can do as well. And so from a very young age, my children have always understood that racism exists, but they've always known that they can do something about it. And so, you know, they've always, you know, here in the United States for the last 8 years, 9 years, our government has tried to deport people of Mexican and South American descent, right? Round them up and take them away. And so a lot of the kids in my son's school, their parents are undocumented, and they live in a lot of fear that their parents will be taken away. And so when I talk with my son about this, we when he was little, now he's your age, but when he was little, we would say, what are you going to do to make your friends feel safe today? You know, can you tell them, say hi, ask how they're doing, tell them you're thinking about them, tell them you love them. Can you, if you hear someone say a bad thing about Mexicans in school, what are you going to say? You know, and he would practice with me, and then he would be like, I can do it. And it made a huge difference. And so we never had to have these really deep conversations as he was growing up, because it was so normal in our family to talk about this, and it made it a lot less scary for him.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
I think just one more here. One more question. Yeah, do we have time?
Yeah.
Okay. So. She's nervous.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Sophia, and I wanted to ask you if you have any suggestion for us of any Afro writer or books that talk about it, because we are really trying to do something to be better persons, you know, about it.
Okay, that's a great question. So what I can do for you guys actually is I can email your teacher a list of some books and writers so that you can have some things you can look up and read that talk about this, because I think that will be really important. And so I can send you, if you are looking at some like Afro-Brazilian writers, I can send you some names. And then I think just broader Black writers as well, I can send you a name of different writers and stuff that you can look at. So I can send that to your teacher so she can give it to you guys so you can look up and read more. Does that sound good?
Yes, that would be great. Actually.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Joe, I was wondering if we could take a picture of your picture. So we're gonna come here and take a picture with you. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
All right,
Thank
guys, here. Ninth grade 2.
Agachado e fica.
Abaixa, levanta. Não, eu vou baixar aqui com eles, ó.
Não tá bom, não. Ai, meu cu.
Say cheese.
Cheese.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ijeoma. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, now we're good. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.